Hello, Patrick Dunno here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal
Weekly Podcast.
Teagasc published its National Farm Survey for 2015 on Tuesday, showing that the average farm income rose last year despite the fall in prices for commodities such as milk, grain and pig meat. Speaking at the launch of the National Farm Survey, Teagasc's Brian Moran talked about income projections for this year and the crisis in the dairy sector.
Brian, for dairy farm incomes, it showed in the report they invested by an average of €20,000, perhaps of their own money rather than using credit. How exposed are dairy farmers in terms of cash flow for 2016?
Yeah, Amy, that's right. What we show on average is that dairy farmers invested over 20,000. Now, what's actually quite interesting is only half of dairy farmers have some farm-related debt. Okay, so if you take out the farms that have no debt, you end up with an average debt level on dairy farms of €93,000. It seemed quite high, but dairy farmers have had a very good income last year. So the income is in the region of €63,000. So their debt-to-income ratio is still 1.44, which isn't too bad. Now, when you look at the lower milk price going forward, obviously there's going to be challenges in 2016, so farmers will have to be very cautious as to how they manage their money.
And coming up to the abolition of the quotas, 80% of dairy farmers expanded. In hindsight, was this the right move?
Yeah, like what we've done today is we've divided farmers into maybe 3 or 4 groups. So we've looked at farmers that had lower deliveries than they had last year. Then we've looked at farmers that have had, say, an increase of 10%, an increase of 20% or greater than 20%. So what we find is that farmers that stood still or reduced their production, their incomes dropped by over 30%. If you wanted to maintain your income last year, you needed to increase production by over 20%. It's not clear if that's possible next year. The likelihood is that farmers had been gearing up for quota removal, so they would have been building their herds, drafting extra heifers for the last number of years. It'll be interesting to see if they can continue to increase their production next year. There's no way that they'll be able to increase, you'd imagine, to the extent they increased last year, even though when we look at deliveries for the first 3 months, you see dairy deliveries up by in the region of 30%. Now, we think that there's possibly an effect carryover from last year. You remember in the first 3 or 4 months last year, farmers were in a super levy situation, so could have been holding back deliveries. That wasn't the case in the first few months of this year. So I suppose it'll be after July or August before we'll know how much volume is going to be up.
Cattle rearing is the most common type of farming in Ireland, and although incomes last year increased by 34%, average income is only €10,000. So that's only an increase of $3,000. What can cattle farmers expect for their incomes this year?
2015 is quite a good year for cattle farmers. We saw increased prices. So wheeling prices were up by about 6%. Store prices were up over 10%. Finishing prices were up about 13%. And cull cow prices were up about 16%. So cattle prices were very strong last year. What we're going to see this year is in the first 3 months we've seen cattle prices equivalent to the 2014 levels. Now, we would hear anecdotal evidence that prices have increased in the last number of weeks in the factories. In 2015, prices only really spiked June, July, August, that time of the year. So we'll be looking to see, I suppose, what happens with Brexit. If sterling is a bit weaker this year, it was very strong last year at that time. If England decides to stay in, the likelihood is that sterling will get stronger, very positively affect cattle prices. But because of the whole Brexit situation, things are a bit doubtful at the moment.
It was said during the launch that Brexit will determine how the end of the year goes. Do you see Brexit, if it does happen, and having a detrimental effect on some beef farmers?
40% of our beef output goes to Britain. Okay, so sterling is obviously very important, and if sterling was to weaken, you would imagine it would have a knock-on effect on cattle prices.
You surveyed 84,000 farmers and incomes were up by 6%, bringing it to an average of 26,526. What do you predict for all sectors for this year?
We look at farm income going forward in 2016. Obviously, dairy farmers are in a particular situation because of the low milk price. You would expect the volume will be up this year. We also expect costs to be slightly up, basically because farmers have been slower to turn out cattle. Okay, the late spring has meant that farmers have had to feed probably more this year than they had last year. We think that's going to affect overall costs, even though it looks like fertiliser prices will be down. We still think costs will be up on dairy farms this year. On the cattle situation, we're thinking that cattle farm income prices at the minute are back 5%. If cattle prices are back 5%, you would expect cattle incomes to be down next year. So hard to say how much the overall sector will be down, but the likelihood is at the minute both the cattle and the dairy sectors, which are probably the predominantly two sectors in the industry, will show reductions in income next year. To what extent will become clear, I suppose, as the year goes on.
In terms of incomes, a significant amount of the farmers were making less than €10,000. Do you predict that more farmers will have to seek work off the farm?
What we've seen this year is that 50% of farm households have some form of off-farm employment, whether that be with the spouse or the holder. That's reduced since the time of the boom in 2007, 2008. We saw maybe 60% of the holder or spouse having an off-farm job. It fell for the first few years from 7, 8, 9, 2010 and has bottomed out since 2011, has remained static. It hasn't changed in the last 3 to 4 years. You would imagine that with the economy picking up, possibly there'll be more off-farm opportunities, but at the minute there's been no change in the last 3 to 4 years, so it's hard to see that changing next year.
Mm-hmm. In terms of education, is the Green Cert fit for purpose?
What we would have seen, we'd see is that the number of attending agricultural colleges has increased in the last 2 to 3 years. It is slightly interesting this year, we're not too sure, is it because of the Young Farmers Scheme? We saw the reduction in the average age of a farmer from 57 down to 54. It's quite possible that is because of the introduction of the Young Farmer Scheme and farmers coming through from the Green Cert, the training course.
And we also seen that there's huge differences in the different regions. What would you attribute that to?
So what we find when we look at farms by region is that farms in the border regions tend to be more livestock based, smaller farms. As you go down the country, you see farms in the east have the largest size farms, over 50 hectares on average. Farms in the southeast tend to be the biggest and tend to have the biggest predominance of dairying. So what you see is in the south, the southeast, the southwest, you see a larger predominance of dairy farms. As a result, those regions have a higher income per hectare. The average income per hectare in the border region is about €340. When you go down to the southeast, which is the highest income, you see an average income of about €780 per hectare. So obviously the region you're in, the soil type, the weather influences what type of farming can take place. Be familiar with the better land as you move south. In the border regions, in the western region, tend to get more rain, possibly later turnout days with cattle. Better lands in the south and the east mean that you have predominance maybe of dairying and the tillage enterprises which are more profitable.
Brian, thank you very much.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
One farm that has certainly grown beyond the average farm income level is Country Crest. Now an integrated vegetable growing and packing company in North County Dublin with more than 200 staff. Country Crest was one of the family businesses studied by DCU researchers, and Irish Farmers Journal reporter Amy Fitzgibbon met its managing director Michael Hoey at the presentation of their findings last Friday.
I suppose we're an agri-food business really, with different sections within it. We're a farming piece. First of all, it's primary production, and then we have a packing, washing, grading and packing operation then of potatoes and vegetables for the multiple sector. And then I suppose in recent years then we have diversified into prepared meals, soups, desserts, all that. Further processing, in other words.
And you are what generation then?
Well, I suppose my grandfather and father before us were farmers on the same farm, and then my brother and I came along, and I suppose we were looking to do something better and to make a better living for ourselves and to innovate. And Country Crest was born in 1993.
Okay.
And that became the hub then to build the different modules on.
The Country Crest then, what kind of vegetables do you sell?
Well, predominantly it's potatoes and onions.
Okay.
And then some of the lesser vegetables then as well. But we would pack in the region of between 500 and 600 tonnes of potatoes every week.
Wow.
And 150 to 200 tonnes of onions each week as well for the multiples.
Yeah. And how many family members are involved in the business?
This is my brother and I at this minute in time.
And of course the findings of the report were that family businesses are a lot more resilient than other businesses, and there's also greater commitment from the employees or from the people who are working there because of, I suppose, the relationship with the family. Do you find that those findings resonate with you?
I think you have to be resilient because you don't have any safety nets. So every day you're out there, you have to make crucial decisions. They have to be the right decisions. And also there have to be decisions that instill a confidence with your employees, because your employee, you don't attract talent unless you have firm foundations and that you are actually making the right decisions.
Yeah. And what are the key lessons you've learned then, in being in a family business?
I think you never become complacent.
Yeah.
Every day you have to act as if it's your first day.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like a game of snakes and ladders sometimes. You think you're getting on very well and you're climbing the ladders and such, but always there's the way back down again.
Yeah.
So I think you have to work very hard at what you do.
Yeah.
You have to be honest, and I think you have to be humble as well.
Yeah.
That's so important.
And working with family, did you ever think, oh God, that wouldn't be a good idea? Or have you always gotten on well with your brother? And...
I think I've always got on well with my brother. We've never really had any conflict or rows between us, so we've been very fortunate that way.
Yeah.
And then we operate different parts of the business as well. So
okay, so he's more as operations manager?
He's more as operations, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
But you also have an independent group of a board of directors as well to kind of advise?
We've been very fortunate in that we have a fantastic team in Country Crest.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things in any family business, or any business when you're building it, is you have to recognise that you need talent that are more experienced than yourself. And I think a lot of families don't take that on board.
And I mean, what are the main pressures now on you and the business?
I think chief food policies is the massive pressure on any food business out there. And the consumer's expectation that they can buy food for nothing.
Yeah.
And that is creating a massive challenge, be it in the dairy sector or in the vegetables or the meal sector that we operate in. It doesn't matter where you are today. It's this expectation.
This is the cut down of prices, like
it is,
the Lidl and the Aldi's doing.
Well, it's not alone Lidl and everybody.
Yeah.
There's probably too much retail space all across this country and every other country. And what's happening is that they're killing each other for market share.
Right.
And that market share in turn is driving the price of food into the ground.
Yeah.
And not alone that, you've probably heard the word stomach share before. And where stomach share is where people are eating more and more outside the house or outside the home as such.
Yeah.
That is driving more competition into the sector as well.
People aren't going into supermarkets to buy their potatoes.
No, and like we're in Ireland now that over 18% of all food is eaten outside the home.
Wow.
That was only 6% in 1980.
Okay.
So, and it's growing.
And tell me a little bit about your corporate social responsibility element to your business, because that's a very interesting part of it.
I suppose luck has a lot to do with any business, and I think that we've been very grateful for where we have got to today. And I think you always have to be mindful of people who are less fortunate, be it in Ireland or abroad. And that's where we got involved in a farm in Haiti, in the Christian Valley in Haiti. And being able to work with people out there who are so enthusiastic about wanting to feed themselves, and the values that those people have, something that maybe some of us have lost in this country over the last few years, and it brings you back to ground pretty quickly. And I think you get a lot of self-satisfaction from being involved with these people.
And do you go over to Haiti often?
Yes, as much as I can.
Okay.
We're all only on this planet for a very short few years, and I think if you can do something to have somebody in a less well-off state, it's well worth doing.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And talking of, I suppose, being on this planet for a few years, have you talked about succession at all, or is that something that's...
Just something that's now in our focus now that we have to address.
Because it came up very strongly today during the report.
And I think the DCU Family Business Network is very important because it brings a focus to this, as other family business network organisations like the FBN, for instance. There's great bodies now that are really bringing attention to this subject. It was something that was often put in the cupboard for many years and never addressed.
And would it be important for you that the business stays in the family?
I think it's what is best for the business is more important than the family as such.
Yeah.
The business is more to make sure that the business continues and that it's sustainable and that it operates in the proper manner
Yeah.
is so important. And if that is people that work within the business to continue that other than the family, well, maybe that's the better way of doing it.
Yeah.
We don't know that yet.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
This Wednesday, hundreds of farmers visited the Newford demonstration suckler farm in Athenry, County Galway. Dawn Meats and Teagasc are running a 5-year research project there to find a way of producing the most profitable cattle in line with factory specifications. One aspect discussed at the farm walk was health, and Teagasc beef advisor Aidan Murray drew from the Newford example to share practical advice with William Conlon.
Provided you have your vaccinations and maybe for calves done again, if you're going to be vaccinating against pneumonia, and you take it that's done, I suppose the next thing that fellas will be looking at will be sort of parasite control. And maybe one of the suggestions that, certainly that they're trying in Newford here is that you should be trying to make more use of dung samples. It'll tell you a lot in terms of when there's going to be issues with lungworm, stomach worm, and it'll give you a much more targeted treatment rather than going out and picking a date and saying, look, we need to treat for lungworm today, or we need to treat for stomach worms. Try and use the sort of the dung samples to get the fecal samples and that. The other area, I suppose, is that we're in the breeding season. You need to be keeping a very close eye in terms of overall fertility. If you take a fellow that started to breed on the 1st of May, and we're by the time we get to the middle of June, assuming say 60% conception, you'd be expecting about 85% of the cows to be in calf. If you're seeing a high number of breeds, you need to be taking records when cows are served, are they coming back, and investigating why there is there a problem out there, because every day that a cow's not in calf is costing you money, and it's going to affect your output in a year, 18 months' time.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Aidan.
The Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
One of the supporters of the Newford research herd and major purchaser of beef across the island of Ireland is McDonald's. Conor McVeigh manages the UK supply chain for the fast food company, and he met Irish Farmers Journal Northern Ireland editor David Wright at the recent Balmoral show.
Well, it's great to be here at Balmoral, and we've been here exhibiting for many years. We've got a long-standing relationship with a number of suppliers. We source a lot of product from Northern Ireland, whether it be beef, whether it be cheese, whether it be milk. But the reason for being particularly excited about this year's show is that this week we launched for the first time ever something that we're calling our Food Steps campaign. And it's very much a campaign that's championing the passion and skills of British and Irish farming. We know that there's a challenge in the industry, we know there's a number of challenges, but one thing our farmers have shared with us is a concern over the lack of new people that's coming into the industry. We're a big customer to British and Irish farming, so the Food Steps campaign is about taking food and farming out on the road to members of the public, and if you want, lifting the lid on what it's like to grow and harvest potatoes, what it's like to produce milk, and what it's like to actually serve up food in our restaurants, ultimately in order to encourage people to think differently and more positively about a career in food and farming.
And obviously you are an important customer for British and Irish farming, particularly I suppose the beef industry, because you use a lot of product that maybe helps balance the carcass, etc.
That's right. We're a very big customer on the beef side. Our business, our brand is built upon beef, and it remains a fundamentally important part of our offer. We spend over £900 million just to satisfy the needs of our Northern Irish and our UK restaurants, and within that we buy 40,000 tonnes of beef. To put that in context, that would be double the size of the beef business of some of the biggest supermarkets out there. Northern Ireland is a really important part of our supply chain, so we've been working for over 20 years now with some major farmers and producers in Northern Ireland and growing their business, and we hope to do that in the future.
You obviously have done a bit of work on farm as well, looking at efficiency, carbon.
We spent a lot of time meeting farmers, more so than any other job I've had in 22 years in the food industry, and the benefit of that is very quickly we get an appreciation of the opportunities but also the challenges. But you're right, another challenge that we've heard from farmers is increased question from customers around the environmental impact of farming, particularly in the beef industry, which is why we undertook a 6-year programme of research that resulted in what we've called our beef carbon report, that identifies ways and means through which individual farmers can relatively easily make a big change, in some instances up to 24% reduction in their carbon footprint, and most importantly translating that into big savings and an opportunity to make more profitable and efficient farming operation.
Because essentially that carbon is all about efficiency and saving money, using your inputs better.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we learnt was how we take the language and the opportunity of that best practice out to farmers. Yes, they have an appreciation about carbon footprinting and environment, but there's nothing like actually being able to say to an individual family farmer, through embracing this technology, you can save £23,000-24,000 a year.
Conor, thank you very much for your time.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Vodafone has commissioned a report to examine the broadband situation in rural Ireland and found that 1 in 5 houses could not access the service. My colleague Anya Hennessy asked Vodafone Ireland's Chief Executive Anne O'Leary how our country compares with others in Europe.
I suppose, there's been some investment in rural Ireland and broadband, but I think from this report we're seeing that 1 in 5 have no access, and 40% of businesses in rural Ireland are frustrated with speeds and quality. So definitely there needs to be something done, and our vision is to create a gigabit society where we can offer gigabit speed broadband to everyone, everywhere, irrespective of where they live, so that people living in rural Ireland have equality of access to people living in urban Ireland.
So do you think people outside of urban areas in Ireland are being forgotten about?
Well, this report actually shows that people in rural Ireland are embracing digital technology. And if you look at the report, you'll see whether it's connecting to friends and family, whether it's shopping online or banking, they are using it. So that was very optimistic. However, what it's also telling us, and the people are telling us, is they want better quality, they want better speeds, and they want more of it. So I think there's an opportunity for government, local communities, businesses like Vodafone to work together to look at that solution. And obviously government's plan on the National Broadband Plan is key to this. And what we want to ensure is that the technology that's deployed through this is future-proof, that it is of the highest quality and the highest speed, and it needs to be gigabit speed and fibre to the building or fibre to the home. I think farmers, like any business, absolutely need technology, and we've seen, up-and-coming farmers and younger farmers embracing that. So I think it's absolutely key for rural farming, for them to be more efficient, more productive and more profitable. And again, we really want to work with the farming community to find a solution that can bring this gigabit society to the farmers of Ireland. So this is a bit like the electrification of Ireland. And I think it's a right for everyone to have high-speed broadband.
I'm here with Gerard O'Neill, who is chairperson of Amorach, who carried out the research for this report. So, Gerard, can you tell me some of the key findings of the research?
For me, I think one of the key findings is that right now people in rural Ireland are optimistic about the future in terms of access to digital technology. They're using it as best they can in their work, in their shopping, in education and in health. But what we also find alongside that optimism, there's a lot of frustration. And what we find is that there's not so much a rural, urban-rural divide or split. It's more of a spectrum ranging from kind of suburbs all the way through to bungalows out in the countryside. And when you look at that spectrum and you look at the answers that you get from that, the further you get away from that kind of high-density population towards the more countryside parts of rural Ireland, you get growing frustration about the ability to get the benefit of faster broadband.
And how do you think access to connectivity would improve people's lives in rural Ireland, and particularly for people involved in agriculture?
That came through very strongly in the research. In fact, what we found was there's a kind of an awareness now that in farming digital connectivity and technology has the potential to transform the practice of farming in some instances in terms of efficiency, in terms of cost saving, in terms of productivity. Some good examples might include, for example, remote monitoring of cattle that are calving. There might even be, for example, from aspects of healthcare. Security is a big issue that we saw, both farmers and others living in rural Ireland, and having remote monitoring of premises is also very important. That can also extend to farm machinery, herds and so on. So I think it's fair to say that at the moment, in terms of farmers, they see the potential, but they're also perhaps the ones facing the biggest barriers to realising the potential. And others who live in rural Ireland who are not farmers also see that potential and would welcome it if it comes about.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
As part of our series of reports from the UK exploring farmers' views on next month's Brexit referendum, news correspondent Odile Evans met English farmer Eric Etherington at a busy mart.
You've made up your mind how you're voting, haven't you?
Yes, I am. And we stay where we're at. There is no future in us leaving.
So you think the UK needs to stay in Europe because it's such a small country?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I am of that age where my future doesn't really matter that much. It's the young ones that need to be convinced that they've got to stay with it.
And do you have any young people coming along behind you?
At this moment in time, no. They all reckon they can make more money out of farming, more money out of farming than in farming.
But overall, you think the UK gets a good deal out of Europe?
They do.
Yeah. Why is that?
If we leave, we can forget about the single farm payments to start with. And a big lot of farms rely on that. Yeah. There is all kinds of things that is connected with Europe and we get a benefit from. We stand alone as far as the monetary fund goes, as far as the pound goes, which is no bad thing. And we can't have things all our own way. Life isn't that way.
No, it's not. And so you believe that the UK, should, along with the other European countries that are, quite wealthy, should help the smaller European countries to even the playing field.
We went in it when we were a small European country.
Yeah.
We've had help over the years. All right, there's a lot of these countries. I'm a strong believer that it is too large. Far too large.
27 member states.
27 member states. There was room there when they started taking in other countries 3 or 4 years ago to have started something new. There was the EU, and there could have been, for these other countries, there should have been another group.
Level 1 and level 2 almost.
Yes,
like, yeah. So, for young farmers coming along, and getting access to subsidies and everything, you think that being within the EU will make it easier for them? Or harder?
Where's the subsidy going to come from if we aren't in the EU?
Because farmers in England don't have as much. Their MPs aren't as worried about agriculture, say, as
the MPs aren't. They don't want farmers. People don't want the farmer, and the politicians are very much that way. Every now and again, we've got to give them a poke and tell them we are important.
Yeah. Without the EU, you don't think the UK government will support farming?
Not at all.
Yeah.
They'll walk away from British farming.
Which is a scary thing, isn't it?
It is. When we went into the EU, I voted to go into it. I've watched the benefits of it. People look at the other side of the coin, and other industries look at the other side of the coin. As far as farming is concerned, we're in the EU.
And then my last question is, how do you think the vote will go? Let's say we've been talking to farmers and that, and any idea?
We're going to stay in.
You think?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Many events are taking place to raise awareness on mental health this month as part of the Green Ribbon campaign, including a Farm Safety Open Day incorporating mental health aspects in County Wexford on Saturday last. Irish Farmers Journal news correspondent Odile Evans was there and she met psychotherapist Dennis O'Connor.
Farming today, people are under more and more pressure every day they go out, and they're really working flat out 7 days a week, most of them to try and make an income of it. And sometimes they reach a stage that we call burnout, where they're literally working so hard they've no time for themselves and they literally just can't keep going. So they need to talk, need to find a way out of the dilemma that I'm in at the minute.
This here today, like the farm safety and well-being, is a great initiative, but I suppose possibly the people who should be here to hear this message aren't here, and how do we get that message across to them?
Well, I suppose the great thing today is that most people are well connected, and I spoke a bit about Facebook and everything, but it is a great medium for getting the message out, but it needs to be repeated from the top down. Even at a local level here, the message has gone out today by a couple of hundred people who attended here, but if there was an initiative taken from the top to say, look, we need to take time out, we need to talk, we need to reconnect with leaders, but there must be an initiative from the top down. This is coming from the bottom up, and it might well work, and I think it's great, the initiative. But if someone at the head of this organisation was to say, let's put something in place to allow people reconnect together, let's get back to doing what we were good at, still being busy, but taking time out that at least when Monday comes we're fresh heading back in, so our bodies and our minds need a rest, and a big initiative from someone around the whole area of farming and the whole area of mental well-being maybe deserves a push from the top.
And it really does link in with farm safety, because ultimately, you know, if you're under stress you're going to make mistakes, and that's when accidents happen, isn't it?
Well, the worst time to make any decision is when we're under pressure, whether it's on a farm or in business or whatever. So if you're constantly under stress, you don't function well, you don't make good decisions. As a matter of fact, it's the worst time to make a decision, when you're under stress. And then our brains are constantly in what we call reactive mode. They're constantly reacting to new things, where we need to take them out of that and put them into what I call a reflective mode, where we have that day in the week where we sit back and reflect on the week that's passed and the week ahead, which helps us to settle down and engage better and fully and be more alert when we go to work on Monday.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Newford, the home of Irish dairy.
So what isn't the new government planning to address mental health issues? Anthony Jordan interviewed the Junior Minister in charge of mental health, Helen McEntee, for this week's Irish Country Living.
When I talk to people, and I've talked to a lot of people in the last few days about mental health and where they stand, one of the main things that have been coming out of it is how long people have to wait to see a psychiatrist after they've been diagnosed. Is this a structural issue? Is this a funding issue? Why are people waiting so long, maybe up to 6 months or a year?
I think it is a mixture of things, really. It's a mixture of an increase in demand, so more people actually seeking out the service. You're trying to reduce anybody who's waiting over 12 months, which obviously nobody should be waiting that length of time, to reduce that to under 3 months, and it maybe is putting pressure on the middle section, people who are waiting over the 3 months. I think you also have an issue where you don't have all the staff. That's something that I'm very keen to actually identify within the colleges. What numbers do we have going into college? What numbers do we have coming out of college? Where is the shortfall? That's something that I'm actually very, very interested in trying to understand, where we are falling down with our staff.
Personally, in terms of your own story, obviously your father passed away tragically in 2012.
Yes.
How has that affected you in terms of how you're going to approach this job?
I mean, it's obviously something that's very close to my heart, and it gives me a personal drive to want to try and do something. To be honest, I think being 29 and I suppose seeing friends of mine who have gone through difficulties and seeing younger people struggling with the changes to everyday life is as much as a motivation as what happened to my father.
As you said, the little or no funding that was in the pot for mental health in the past few years, has there been a major flaw in government spending during the boom years when we had money to spend in terms of mental health?
Yes, I think so. I think like a lot of things, maybe money wasn't invested the way that it should have been. We talk about it, the better that we can do.
Helen McEntee, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Newford, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Finally, with the Ballymaloe Litfest attracting the limelight this past weekend, Irish Country Living editor Mairead Lavery caught up with the woman who started it all, Doreen Allen.
It's 4 years ago since you established the Literary Festival.
Yes.
Has it just gone beyond your wildest hopes?
Well, it absolutely has. I mean, the vibe that's here, the energy, the discussions, the inspiration, it's extraordinary.
And the enthusiasm.
And the enthusiasm, absolutely. Plus the sunshine.
I know.
And there was raining almost all over Ireland, so how fortunate are we?
So what was your main aim when you set this up?
Well, look, there were a couple of things. First and foremost, we wanted to link Ireland's literary legacy with food as well, those two things. And there are so many amazing food people all over the world as well as here now. And we wanted to bring the best, the most exciting, the most cutting-edge people from all around the world who are writing about food, cooking, having discussions about it, to Ireland so that we could meet them. And, you know, there are 30 different nationalities we know about here this weekend. People have come in from all over the world.
Yes.
And some of them for the first time to Ireland. And a lot of the food writers and chefs and so on, they are all, of course, write cookbooks as well. A lot of them write columns. So each of them has a pen in their hand to spread the word.
And, you know, they're taking photographs and they're blogging about it.
Exactly.
So that really good message is coming through.
It's really getting that super message about what's happening in Ireland and Irish food. And then also I had another agenda because, you know, even despite our best efforts over all the years, I think a lot of people, particularly in America, still think we live on
bacon
beef
and
cabbage, honestly. And that's, of course, very good. But oftentimes the message hasn't got out about what's happening in Ireland and Irish food, the quality of our ingredients and everything
Well,
else.
I think with all the visitors that Ornua bring in, it's absolutely getting that message across. Your other message then is local hero, global hero.
Yes, well, again, to remind all of us that we can make such a difference in our own parishes by really thinking about how we spend that food euro, what we put into our basket. And, you know, if you think first and foremost about buying the food from the local farmers and fishermen and so on, as best as possible.
That message began here with Myrtle Allen, over 50 years ago now, and it's still such a modern and such an essential message to get across.
Well, you know, wasn't she so ahead of her time?
Yeah.
And of course, we export so much of our food here in Ireland as well, so it's a lovely sort of melting pot for all. Yes, exactly.
Well, listen, continued success with the festival and well done and everything. It's been a wonderful weekend.
Oh, thank you. Glad you enjoyed it.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.